Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpain.
Welcome to the musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
We are very glad today to welcome Paul A. Offit back to the musical Innertube. Paul is director of the Vaccine Education Center and professor of pediatrics in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's an internationally recognized communicator and expert in virology and immunology, and was a member of the advisory committee on immunization practices to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's a member of the FDA Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee as well. Among his many books are Autism's False Prophets, Bad Science, Risky Medicine, and the Search for a Cure, Bad Advice, or Why Celebrities, Politicians, and Activists Aren't Your Best Source of Health Information, and most recently, Tell Me When It's Over, an insider's guide to deciphering COVID myths and navigating our post-pandemic world. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure.
Ours too. Paul, I gotta say, I'm resisting the impulse to start our discussion by inviting you to just sit back and howl. I'm sure you feel like that sometimes, especially lately. But I would like to ask you to comment on one big sweeping thing. Ours is a country that has everything, is very rich, very creative, often humane. And yet we just can't seem to cozy up to public health. As a person who's been prominent all this millennium in the public health discussion, do you have any thoughts about why that seems to be so? What is it that we can't, get next to or can't accept?
I think it's not a matter of not cozying up to public health. I think right now there's a significant percentage of this country that has disdain for public health. I think that people that were hired by the Trump administration to lead Health and Human Services or the FDA or the CDC or the NIH have disdain for those agencies. And people ask me, reporters have said to me, do I think that if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the head of Health and Human Services, that would cause people to lose trust in those public health agencies that he supervises? No, I think the reason he was picked was because he doesn't trust those agencies. He represents the zeitgeist.
Right.
Let me jump in here real quick. I was listening to an interview on the radio a couple of weeks ago, not even that long, with a virologist, somebody who studies the medicine or the diseases like measles that are very, very, very contagious. And he said, we went through a pandemic, and in the middle of that pandemic, we went through an amazing situation where scientists identified the culprit and came up within days, within weeks, with an effective vaccination for it. And I thought, that's going to teach people how good science is nowadays. And he says, nowadays, it's even worse. People trust science even less than they did before that huge undertaking and that big success. So it disappointed him, and I'm assuming that you're in the same boat.
Yeah, I think people don't realize who, to me, the real hero of this pandemic was. I think the real hero of this pandemic was the National Institutes of Health. I mean, they had funded people like Drew Weissman and Katie Carrico starting in 1997 to look at mRNA as a possible vaccine. And both of them ultimately won the Nobel Prize in 2023 for their work. They funded internally people like Barney Graham and Kizzy Corbett starting around 2002, 2003 when SARS-1 hit to try and make an mRNA vaccine against SARS-1. Now, that virus really never came into this country, so we didn't do it. But by the time SARS-CoV-2 hit, the cause of COVID, we were ready. And so Operation Warp Speed, for which, Donald Trump got enormous amounts of credit, as he should, was really a production program more than a research and development program. And so when RFK Jr. stands up and he says, I think that we should let NIH give infectious diseases a break for 8 years. I mean, he has no appreciation for what NIH did.
It is one of the great success stories in recent technological application of medicine. And it's so hard to, as I remember when I was on the vaccine ethics committee with you, we met with people who objected to this whole thing. And it's very difficult to explain that this is not an intrusion in public life. It's a way to make it better. It's a way to make your children's lives better.
Sure. I mean, we've entered an age of science denialism. I think people simply declare their own truths, including scientific truths. I think science is losing its place as a source of truth. You see, for example, HIV denialism, meaning that HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, is the cause of AIDS. People are, we're saying that, no, that's not true. HIV doesn't cause AIDS. And now there's like a resurgence of that. It's really hard to watch how this is happening. And our current head of HHS is not the guy who's going to help bring us out of this.
I think it hinges on that discredited study from England years ago that autism was caused by some of the additives that were in vaccines. That's been discredited almost from the time that the research came out. Why is that so lingering? Why is that hanging on? Yeah. Why is that still something that people believe?
Well, so right, you're right. In February 1998, Andrew Wakefield, a British gastroenterologist or gastroenterological surgeon, published a paper in The Lancet, which is a well-respected general medical journal, that the combination measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine caused autism. Now, it wasn't a study. It was just a case series of 8 children who got a vaccine, then within a month of getting that vaccine, developed autism. So there was no control group. There was no way to tell whether the vaccine had caused it. You might as well have published a paper saying, here's 8 children that recently ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that now have signs and symptoms of autism. It was frankly at that level. But in any case, it was the nicest thing you could say was that it raised the question, can MMR vaccine cause autism? That's a testable question and has been answered in a scientific venue again and again and again, doing retrospective studies looking at children who got or didn't get that vaccine to make sure you were controlling for confounding variables like medical background, healthcare seeking behavior, socioeconomic background. And when those studies were done in 7 countries on 3 continents, involving hundreds of thousands of children, you found that MMR didn't cause autism. But to answer your question, it's hard to unring the bell. Once you scare people, it's hard to unscare them. And now studies were done at the time by groups like the Autism Science Foundation in New York. What percentage of, trying to answer the question, what percentage of parents of children with autism believe vaccines cause it? At that time, like late 90s, early 2000s, it was like 90%. Now it's about 15%. So I think those studies were worthwhile doing, and that I think it's convinced a lot of people otherwise, but you're never going to make it go away. And now it's just had an amazing resurgence because I think in part RFK Jr. believes that vaccines cause autism no matter how many studies show that he's wrong.
How did, in the original study, I'm asking out of ignorance, how did Dr.
Which John is very good at.
Yes, I specialize in this. How did Wakefield choose the children to be in the study in the first place? What procedure did he, do you have any idea?
Parents had come to him saying that I think vaccines cause autism. What do you think? I mean, can you help me with this?
Yes.
So he settled on MMR vaccine as the cause of it. Earlier he had done work trying to say that vaccines were also a cause of Crohn's disease, so an inflammatory bowel disease, which was wrong. And ultimately he withdrew that paper, or at least he apologized for being wrong. But here he's never apologized for being wrong, and he's wrong.
It's nice to hear that somebody says he's wrong, just to say he's wrong, because there's often somebody who stands up and shakes a study and says, no, wait, what about, and then do the whataboutism stuff. But he has certainly been discredited for a long time, as far as I can tell. But as Don points out, there's a tenacious D against knowledge sometimes. So Paul, I'm sure you're looking at the news and seeing some straws in the wind about, I don't know, shaky vaccination practices by certain groups out there. And I heard you when we started up this afternoon talking about Texas and New Mexico. Do we know how that got started, the measles thing? Do we know how that got started?
Not sure who the index case was. The index case may have come from out of this country and then entered a population that was fertile ground for spread. I mean, they had in that Mennonite population in the Gaines County area near Lubbock, they had immunization rates of about 80%, which is not adequate to stop the spread of this virus. And then it's just taken off. So there's now, at least of today, 124 cases, one death that was reported today in a school-aged child who was unvaccinated. And it's tragic. It really is tragic to me. I mean, there's so much in medicine we don't know. There's so much we can't do. This we know. Measles virus can cause hospitalizations and death. We have a vaccine that is highly effective. To me, the most amazing story about measles is it is the most contagious infectious disease. Not vaccine preventable infectious disease.
I didn't know that.
Infectious disease, period. It's far more contagious than COVID or flu or RSV or Ebola. It's the most contagious infectious disease. I mean, there's something that in medicine called the contagiousness index, meaning how many people will you infect during a day, assuming that everyone you come in contact with is susceptible. For diseases like COVID, flu, RSV, it's about 2 to 4. For measles, it's 18. And the reason is you don't have to have direct face-to-face contact with someone with measles. You just have to be in their airspace within 2 hours of them being there. That's why it's so impossible to contain. The fact that we could eliminate this disease, which we did by the year 2000, is a testament to the effectiveness of that vaccine. But I think the problem is that not only have we largely eliminated measles, we've eliminated the memory of measles. And people think, okay, well, now I just don't have to get the vaccine because it just seems to be like a childhood rite of passage, which a number of parents have recently said, no, okay, I'm a child of the 50s. I had measles, I had mumps, I had German measles, I had chickenpox, I had all those diseases. You could argue rubella, German measles, was a relatively mild disease of childhood. It was a severe disease, obviously, if it infected a woman during her pregnancy. But you could argue that was a childhood rite of passage, not measles. Measles made you sick, and any parent at that time knew measles made you sick.
What is it about measles that makes it deadly? Since we have that one child who has passed, and there have been measles outbreaks in recent memory that have killed mostly children, I suppose. What is it that makes? Because most of us, you're right. When we were kids, we had measles, and we went through it, and we went about our business. But what is it that makes it deadly in certain instances?
Right. So we think of measles as rash, fever and a rash, but it's pneumonia. It's also a pneumonia. Measles virus often causes pneumonia. It may not be clinically evident, but if you get x-rays on everybody with measles, a decent percentage will have abnormal chest x-rays associated with measles virus. And there is no specific treatment for that. It's just supportive treatment and hope for the best. And I suspect if you had to guess the most likely reason that child died of measles in West Texas, it most likely was measles pneumonia.
It's so interesting, isn't it, that the three of us can sit around and wax nostalgic about our measles experiences. I mean, I have to say, when I got it, I had a lot of problems with my breathing and stuff. So I think you just hit the nail on the head there. I did not know that just until now that really you're looking at a pneumonia in some cases. And those things can carry you off really easily. It's impressive just how quickly a person can round the bend and suddenly be in a situation that's very difficult to deal with.
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, before we went on the air, before we started recording, you mentioned that there were pediatricians out there who were kind of at a loss. They had never seen a measles case. As you mentioned, it was eradicated by the vaccinations a few years ago, and there are now doctors in the system who have never encountered anybody who has measles. That's kind of a weird situation, isn't it?
Yes, and even in our hospital, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, we had admitted a couple kids with measles. I remember thinking, did we really need to admit this child? Because you're admitting them for one of two reasons. Either one, they're severely dehydrated and they need intravenous fluids to rehydrate them. Or two, they have pneumonia and require supportive therapy, either oxygen therapy or further supportive therapy for the pneumonia. But I remember when measles was, I trained in Baltimore, like in the, when did I train? In the 70s. And there was a big measles outbreak in North Baltimore. And similarly, I was in Philadelphia in 1991. You don't want measles in the hospital. You don't want children with measles in the hospital because it's highly contagious. You have a vulnerable population of children, many of whom can't be vaccinated and are immune compromised. You don't want measles in the hospital. So what we would do is in the emergency department, if they were short of breath, you wanted to make sure that they were oxygenating well, and that they didn't essentially have severe pneumonia. And then tell them, be careful that, if they have any more trouble breathing, breathe them back. But if they were breathing, and oxygenating well, and they weren't building up carbon dioxide, great, that's a win. And then even if they were a little dehydrated, you want to make sure they could drink in front of you, that they could rehydrate themselves. And if they couldn't, then you would bring them in. Or if they were significantly short of breath, you would bring them in, obviously. But you don't want measles in the hospital. And I bet that there are kids that are getting admitted who may not normally get admitted because we're not used to this disease.
And doctors probably don't have off the cuff protocols for this. In other words, a measles comes in and they may have to look up, okay, how do I deal with this? How do I take care of this? Because maybe the first instinct is to admit them, but like you said, you don't want measles in a hospital.
Right. And you're most contagious before the rash. It usually starts with the so-called 3 C's: cough, conjunctivitis, coryza. So conjunctivitis is just pink eye, coryza is runny nose. And then it starts with sort of a rash right at the hairline, and then progresses down. And then there's so-called Koplik spots, which are typical for the disease. And it's like little grains of sand on the inside of the cheeks. And then it spreads down to the trunk, arms, legs. It's like your sort of measles rash is kind of poured on your head and then spreads downward. But kids are sick. They're always sick. And even though they may not have pneumonia or dehydration, they're photophobic, meaning they're intolerant to light. You often walk into the room and the lights are down and the kid's looking down. And I can tell whether somebody has measles in 30 seconds because they're sick.
How is it going with handling this? I don't know what I want to call it, but this measles incident, as far as you can tell, are doctors and local clinics and hospitals, are they doing what they should be doing as far as you know?
I don't know.
Yes. Yeah,
and I read the Texas Department of Health reports, which are, they tell you the number of cases. They tell you where they're happening. But they don't give you a lot of details on why children are getting hospitalized. You don't get that information.
You may not get that information in the future, the way these departments are getting chopped up.
May I ask about Kansas and tuberculosis? Because I know that they've been sort of, it may be a low level spread, but there have been a significant number of cases of tuberculosis in Kansas. It seems to have arisen among factory workers first, where people are in close proximity to one another. And, to be humane about it, you can have tuberculosis and not know it. You can infect others without knowing it. It's just down the line that it can get really terrible. And is this the same kind of thing as we've been seeing in Texas, or is it a separate kind of occurrence?
No, but again, where's the CDC? I guess, again, theoretically, local health departments are expected to take care of these outbreaks when they occur. And if they feel it's gotten out of hand, or if they feel they need a level of expertise they don't have internally, then they ask the CDC to come in. But I really think it would be nice to have the CDC commenting on what's going on in West Texas, commenting on what's going on in Kansas. I mean, it just seems like they're standing back. Now, they're sort of under siege right now. They've had about 10% of the workforce cut. You have at least a temporary suspension of the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which kind of would send a chilling effect, I think, throughout the CDC. People are scared. And I just don't think they're able to do their job, it seems right now, when it's so desperately needed.
Paul, could you explain what that intelligence service is and does, and why it's so terrible that it has been hampered? And you went past that quickly, and I'd love it to be explained for my listeners.
Sure. So an EIS officer, Epidemic Intelligence Service officer, like let's suppose there's an outbreak of salmonella, a point source outbreak of salmonella somewhere in this country. So they go there and they investigate, because they're really good at this, to figure out what that possible source was, so they could isolate it and make sure that others, don't get infected, and that, that they do the proper precautions. So they're like, they're investigators. They're it's fun. They're detectives. They're infectious disease detectives.
Sounds like a new TV show to me. infectious disease detectives. Maybe if we had one of those, people would go ahead with science if they could see it on their TV every week. We'll return to our discussion with Paul in a moment, but first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Paul A. Offit is director of the Vaccine Education Center and professor of pediatrics in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's also the Maurice R. Hilleman Professor of Vaccinology at the Perelman School of Medicine at Penn.
He is an internationally recognized communicator and expert in the fields of virology and immunology, and was a member of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He is a member of the FDA Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee.
Among Paul's books are Autism's False Prophets, Bad Science, Risky Medicine, and the Search for a Cure, Bad Advice, or Why Celebrities, Politicians, and Activists Aren't Your Best Source of Health Information, You Bet Your Life, From Blood Transfusions to Max Vaccination, and most recently, 2024's Tell Me When It's Over, an insider's guide to deciphering COVID myths and navigating our post-pandemic world.
For more on Paul, check out his author page at paul-offit, that's OFFIT.com. And now, we return you to the musical Innertube, already in progress. What's the situation as far as getting people more comfortable with vaccines? I mean, obviously, with RFK Jr. in charge now, it looks like at least the National Health Department is going to go in the opposite direction. But you have been trying to educate people for years about the safety and efficacy of vaccines. How can you step that up in order to combat what we're going through?
Right. So there's two possible approaches. One is to educate people, to appear to their cerebrum, that, okay, here's what this disease looks like. Here's how the vaccine works. Here's what the safety profile is of the vaccine. Here's what we know about the vaccine. And to realize that when you choose not to get a vaccine, that is not a risk-free choice. It's a choice to take a different and arguably more serious risk. And here's what that risk looks like. Highlight the disease. Highlight that 1 in 1,000 people die. Highlight that 1 in 100,000 people, which when you're talking about a virus that can affect 3 to 4 million children a year before the vaccine, can cause this disease, which has the long name subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, or SSPE, which is a chronic measles infection of the brain. I've seen this 5 times now. And it's hard to watch. Usually a child has an incidence of measles and they get better. And then 5 years later, 7 years later, they start to have subtle deterioration in their handwriting skills, in their personality. Then they have a loss of motor function, and they have a loss of sensory function. And then they're essentially vegetative, and they die. It may take years for them to die, but they die invariably. There's nothing you can do about it. They have a chronic measles infection of the brain, and there is nothing you can do about it. And it's not that rare. I mean, it's 1 per 100,000, which if you're talking about a sort of a massive outbreak is not all that rare. And again, the virus caused 500 deaths a year before the vaccine, and usually with pneumonia, but occasionally with with dehydration. And also every year before the vaccine, there were 1,000 children who had encephalitis, meaning inflammation of the brain, which would cause in 1/4 of those children, so about 250 a year, blindness or deafness. It's preventable. And I guess I would like to see Donald Trump or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being asked the following 2 questions. 1, do you think measles is causing this outbreak? Because when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went to Samoa during a measles epidemic that caused 5,600 cases and 83 deaths, primarily in children less than 4, he refused to admit that the virus did it. He just said it was a defective vaccine that was spread from one child to another, which was nonsense. It was a wild-type virus, so-called D8 strain of wild-type measles virus. They did that. Refused to admit it, and certainly refused to, in any sense, promote the measles vaccine. I suspect he's going to do the same thing here. If you look at his organization, Children's Health Defense, they just came out in the last day with This is not caused by measles virus, this outbreak in West Texas. This is caused by a defective measles vaccine virus that's spreading from one person to the next. Again, utter nonsense. But and again, where is RFK Jr. in this? He's the head of Health and Human Services. Stand up and support vaccines. It's important that you be vaccinated. Stand up for the children in this country. But he, as he said in his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, which I don't recommend reading it, he's got a segment called Miasma versus Germ Theory. If you read that section, 285 to 288, you will find out that RFK Jr. does not believe in the germ theory, which was pretty much established by 1875. And it's why we live 40 years longer than we did in 1875, because specific viruses or bacteria do cause specific diseases, and the treatment or prevention of them can save lives. He still doesn't believe that. That's why he says HIV doesn't cause AIDS. He's beyond a science denialist. He doesn't believe in the germ theory of infectious diseases.
He's a science ignoramus at this point. This goes back, I guess, to something that, and again, lay people who don't have a huge amount of science that they're exposed to, or when they're exposed to it, they just don't get it. But many people were kind of amazed when they learned that some vaccines used the virus in a inert form in order to build up antibodies in your body for it. So his theory is that that's defective, and we shot measles into these kids. Is that kind of what you're going for, or is what he's going for?
There was a guy named Beauchamp who was he was Pasteur's leading competitor. So Pasteur also sort of proved the germ theory by showing that pasteurization, which is heating say milk or beer or wine to a certain temperature for a certain length of time, could kill bacteria, but at the same time retain sort of the bouquet of milk or beer or whatever. So that's sort of one of the proofs of the germ theory. Also, the isolation of the bacteria that caused anthrax proved the germ theory. But Beauchamp didn't believe that. He believed it was sort of just the terrain allowed for that contagion or that disease to happen. That, in other words, as long as you were healthy, you ate well, your immune system was good, that you weren't going to get any of these diseases. And so you still hear strains of that today. And so to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the miasmist, if you will, believed that there were things that were causing this contagion. So, for example, rotting organic material in the streets would create this sort of bad air. And that if you were exposed to that bad air, that you could get ill. Today, the modern miasmist, like RFK Jr., believes it's things that are man-made, among which are vaccines, pesticides, preservatives, dyes. All those are sort of the modern-day miasmist sees that as your miasma. So you avoid that, and you're fine. And he sees vaccines as a poison. That's why he says, as said in 2023, no vaccine is beneficial. The polio vaccine killed many, many, many more people than it saved. HIV doesn't cause AIDS. I mean, he is a modern day miasmist, which is not good for us.
So I've read where he is on a crusade as part of his now agenda at the health department to get kids to eat better and all that. That sounds good on the surface, but what you're saying is that's tied into a really bad belief that he has.
No, I think it's what made him popular. I think in both the right and the left, which is he says a number of things that are true. I mean, we do have a higher rate of obesity in this country than other countries, and the consequences of obesity, like type 2 diabetes or hypertension, high blood pressure. And we probably do over-medicate our children to some extent. And I think we don't get bang for our buck. I mean, our longevity and infant mortality statistics don't compare well to other developed world countries. I think it's all true. I agree with that. So leave vaccines alone. Why don't we make vaccines part of making America healthy again?
You know, Paul, it's really a good thing that you're no longer on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, because I hear RFK is planning to sack members of it. I don't know quite what that is going to look like. He might target certain people who are very pro-vaccine, or he might, I just don't know. He said certain members he's going to sack. And this is a pattern that we are seeing in the new government. And I'm wondering, again, since you used to be on that board, you must have certain feelings about this.
Well, what upsets me in this is So you take Senator Cassidy, Senator Bill Cassidy, from a Republican from Louisiana. He had a chance to completely kill this confirmation. He did. And I talked to him 4 times in the week before he voted. He called me, and he's a gastroenterologist. He's a good man. I mean, we had long conversations, 30 to 40-minute conversations every time he called, and I was sure he was going to vote no. I mean, he saw RFK Jr. for what he was, but he didn't. He voted yes. And he said, but I have gotten assurances from RFK Jr. on these 10 things. So he listed the 10 things. He wrote them out. I have a list of them right here on my desk. See?
there they are.
There's 10. I see 10 of them right there, Paul.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one of them was that he wasn't going to in any way mess with the advisory committees. Well, so now, we'll see. I mean, he threatens to. It hasn't happened yet. But if it does, I think we should all write a letter to Senator Cassidy and said, look, here's the list that you said things he wasn't going to do, and he's doing it. So he lied to you. What are you going to do now?
Yes,
that seems to be a theme lately with the administration. He lied to you. What can you do about it?
Right.
You know.
Well, speaking of immunity, it does seem as though the administration is immune to embarrassment. They basically have really good, I don't know what kind of, how to extend this metaphor, but they certainly seem to have good defenses against criticism, because even when things are being shown not to really be working very well, they just keep going through. It doesn't seem to faze them. It seems like it's a low information environment, really.
Shamelessness has become a superpower. It's like shamelessness man, right?
Yeah, shamelessness man. There you go. You're talking about what officially can be done, but what about somebody like you, me, John, and millions of others like us who do believe in science and do believe in the efficacy of vaccines? What can we do personally to get this thing off the ground? Because it seems like the only thing that will really matter in this fight on several levels of politics nowadays is grassroots. Right.
So science is on our side. That matters. I mean, the story that I go back to that makes me feel bitter, even though you have to go back to the 1600s to find one. But so Galileo, right? Galileo bought into Copernicus's theory that the Earth revolved around the sun, not the other way around. But his the Roman Catholic Church didn't want Galileo to say that. You couldn't embrace Copernicus' theory because it contradicted the biblical notion that the earth was the center of the firmament. So Galileo was brought up before a committee, a tribunal where he was censured, put in chains, carried away. And he said, it's probably apocryphal, but I love the story anyway, that he presumably in Italian and regarding the earth, and yet, he said, it still moves.
It still moves.
You can put chains on me, but the earth still revolves around the sun. And RFK Jr. can say vaccines cause autism as much as he wants. They don't. And congressmen can say it, and sycophants can say it, and people in the media can say it. But the fact of the matter is it's wrong. And so it will not, and it cannot stand the test of time. And so I think having science on your side is a big deal. I do think the other thing is that there are most people in this country, most parents in this country do believe in vaccines. And I just think we have to harness that energy on that side, because all the passion is on the other side. And frankly, all the money is on the other side. The misinformation, disinformation business is a big business, whereas the information business really isn't.
That's interesting, isn't it? That the people who work in science don't have the bullhorn, do they? So the folks who are doing the bench science, the folks who are doing the multi-centered double-blind tests, these are not the same people who get in front of the microphone every day. There does seem to be an imbalance of communicative power between the folks who really do the science and the folks who are actually running the joint now.
In many ways, your scientific training is the opposite of being an effective communicator. And here's why I say that. The biggest mistake you can make when you write a scientific paper is to ever go beyond the data in front of you. So your discussion section is invariably full of caveats. Yes. I can say this, but not this, not this. And technically, an epidemiological study is not a proof. These aren't mathematical theorems. I mean, you take a hypothesis, usually the null hypothesis, MMR doesn't cause autism. You can either reject it or not reject it, but you can never accept it. You can never prove never. I mean, I can't prove that if I, flap my arms that I can't fly. I can try to do it a million times, and that makes it all the more statistically unlikely, but it doesn't prove it. And you always know that as a scientist. So if you listen to the way that they talk on television, they'll never say, for example, MMR doesn't cause autism. They'll say all the evidence to date, doesn't support the hypothesis that MMR causes autism, which sounds weaselly. It sounds weak, and it sounds like you're hiding something. So we have trouble with it. Also, the personality is not that. I mean, I inoculated mice in a windowless room at the Wistar Institute for 20 years. That was not training for being on the Colbert Report.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a certain sort of conundrum that's going on throughout the whole thing. For example, you have Elon Musk, who will throw out vaccines, but the science of sending men to the moon, he believes in that. You have people who hate big pharma, but they also hate the government. So they throw all of the bath water out and the baby as well by getting rid of all of that vaccine stuff in their head. So it's kind of a weird situation where people believe, again, it's a selective believability, if you will. They believe this, but not that, even though the two are connected.
Yeah, I don't. So how do we win? I think that what the other side has is an enemy, big pharma, which is never going to sound good. And it's impossible to defend in some ways, because big pharmaceutical companies have acted unethically and aggressively and illegally, especially regarding the opioid epidemic. I mean, that was shameful the way that all played out. But that doesn't mean they're always wrong. It doesn't mean that they're always misrepresenting data. I mean, so what do? I think it's very hard. It's very compelling to have a conspiracy theory and have big pharma as behind that conspiracy. It is. So what do we have on our side? I think what we have to do at some level is to show that the RFK Juniors of the world and Del Bigtrees and Mary Hollands, I mean, the people who work sort of on that side, also are doing things that you don't know about. I mean, that they're how they're making money, who's funding them, where does their money come from? I mean, that RFK Jr. made whatever $2.5 million last year, part suing Merck for Gardasil. I mean, this is he's got conflicts of interest that are major. And we don't hear about them. So what he says to you is big pharma is evil. I'm going to take a look behind the curtain, and you can trust me to find what I find. I had probably the most chilling email I've gotten in the last 2 weeks was from a nurse in Canada who said to me, I've just seen a parent of a 1-month-old, parents of a 1-month-old. I was giving them anticipatory guidance for vaccines. This child is going to get at 2 months of age. And the father said to me, and I quote, I'm not anti-vaccine, but I want to wait to see which vaccines RFK Jr. recommends before I get any of them.
Have a nice wait. It was interesting that today on the news, I should never watch it because it just makes me furious these days. But so a particular politician was claiming that 200,000 people died last year from opioid addiction. Now, the number is closer to 60, I believe, 60,000, and that is still a lot of people. It's more people than get killed on the highways in cars and trucks. It is a terrible thing, as you were just saying. One doesn't have to exaggerate the number. The number is still a terrible thing. And so the need of the demagogue to exaggerate is very difficult to fight because it seems to posit a whole realm of information that can fight against the truth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's nuts. It's like when they go into the Social Security and they say, do you know people who've been dead for 150 years are claiming Social Security? And it's like, okay, who are these people? I mean, are they coming out of there? Are we funding zombies? I guess is the question. It's just, I don't know. It's to a lot of people, it's silly, but to a lot of people, it's also concrete. It's something that convinces them that they were right all along, and that the silly notions that come by are actually something that's real. Yeah, it's going to be difficult to fight, but I think at some point, we have to stand up and say, shut up.
Paul, to end this too short discussion, when you move through the year, I wonder if there are things that you're looking forward to, either reports or studies of epidemiologic studies in China, or are there things that are coming up that you're looking at as a practitioner right now?
As far as fears of pandemics, or what do you mean?
Right. As far as the science, as far as vaccines, what's coming up?
Well, I guess the most interesting thing to me is messenger RNA vaccines were interesting. I mean, they have a lot of potential, especially in the world of cancer, because what you do is you take this lipid nanoparticle, which enables you to enter the cell fairly easily. You
Right.
put it into a piece of messenger RNA, and so that enters the cell and joins 200,000 other pieces of messenger RNA that are in the cell, making the proteins and enzymes necessary for life. So you can make now a protein that's put on the surface of that cell that is much more easily recognized by immune cells, which can kill that cell. So now you can use the lipid nanoparticle to target cancer cells, and then put in it a protein that's very easily recognized by the immune system that would cause that cell to die via cells like the immune cells, like cytotoxic T cells, so-called killer cells.
Right.
So that's fascinating. It's a much more targeted way of trying to kill cancer cells rather than the rather blunt way that we use using chemotherapy. So that's interesting. And yet you have the state of Montana, for example, showing you how bad this can be, that was one vote away, really just one legislative session away from banning all mRNA from their state. All mRNA vaccines, period, even if they're cancer vaccines, all mRNA vaccines. So and Louisiana, for example, recently said that they're not going to have any more mass vaccinations, period. Doesn't matter. Measles, bird flu, no more mass vaccinations. So we leaned into a libertarian left hook during this pandemic, and I think we're feeling the results of that punch.
I think that's what is the basis on which Montana was going to ban all mRNA? Were they afraid that it wasn't tested enough and was going to take over the body, or what did they think?
I think
what was the argument?
The culture of the time. We are not going to take this anymore. We're not going to take this from these expert eggheads from the Northeast. The hell with them.
Well,
yeah, it's
look
probably
at us.
Closer to the truth.
Yeah, look at us three, right? Or at least Don and you. Listen, thank you so much, Paul. It's so wonderful to have you on. And I hate to say it, but we probably will talk to you someday soon also. I don't want to say that, but thank you for coming on, and thank you for fighting the good fight.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Happy to come back.
Cheers.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.